This video is sponsored by Lost in Cold. Whether you're conscious of it or not, most of us spend a lot of time in games looking at virtual faces. We customize them, analyze them, and even toy with them like a stress ball in the case of Super Mario 64. It was only up until recently when I played a short demo called Skinface that I started to reflect on how faces are mechanically implemented, though more specifically in games centered around stealing a face. Not long ago, I stumbled upon the Game Jam entry version of Skinface on itch.io, but since then, it's received a small expansion which you can play on Steam. I'd highly recommend playing Skinface for yourself since it only takes about 20 minutes to complete, so please do consider trying it out first before finishing this video. Upon booting up the game, I was presented with a view of an apartment building that seemingly existed within a void. And after taking just a few steps forward through the walkway in front of me, a mission objective appeared instructing me to eliminate a target at their residence. This was accompanied by their apartment number, approximate age and gender, as well as a note that the target hasn't left their home in 2 weeks. Just like me. Fortunately, I was already on the right floor, and as I scanned the apartment doors for the correct number, it didn't take me long to notice one stood out from the rest. I confidently knocked on the door, but to no surprise, the cautious occupant turned me away, refusing to welcome in a stranger such as myself, and therefore not letting me get close enough to complete my objective. A mission update immediately popped up on screen, informing me that I'd just been sent a photograph of somebody that the target trusts, as well as a new task, to disguise myself as the friend. As per the update's description, pressing tab revealed the photo of the individual, but next to it was my face. Well, kind of. It was actually more of a blank slate, a humanoid head devoid of any distinguishable facial features, but through what seemed to be a slightly transparent layer of skin, I could make out the skeleton underneath, and I began to doubt that our character was even human to begin with. Once that unease subsided, I was left to fulfill my next task of molding myself into the person in the photo, and looking around, I could see that figures strolling around the walkways began to appear. Curiously, every single one of them wore what looked like a full-piece Adidas tracksuit with a matching cap to boot, and I attempted to interact with one of them who stopped nearby. This suddenly displayed a face resembling a school art class project with a collage of mismatched features carelessly glued onto its canvas. However, looking at the photo I had on hand, they didn't seem to possess the eyes, nose, or mouth I was searching for, so I abandoned that individual to search for another, but again, no luck. The third time was a charm though, and as soon as I located one of the eyes I needed, I instantly plucked it away from their face and placed it onto my own, leaving a hole of exposed flesh behind the stolen feature. I left my first victim behind, unsure of the effect that my theft could have, before I got my answer and watched their body collapse and sink through the floor. My hunt for the remainder of my mask continued, and I compared numerous different faces with that of the photo until I finally found the second eye. I repeated the process of my previous robbery, but this time my actions did not go unnoticed, and somebody called the police. So alongside finding the remaining nose and mouth required, I'd also have to dodge law enforcement by occasionally making sure their route didn't collide with mine. I carried on traversing the cohesive floors of the building, investigating each identical tracksuit-wearing individual to see if their messy patchwork faces would hold the pieces I needed to build my disguise, and sure enough, I eventually completed my rather shoddy imitation of the visage I was meant to adopt as my own. Finally able to test its efficacy, I returned to the target's door and knocked once more. They hesitated for a moment before asking if I was James, and having been slightly comforted by what they thought was a familiar face, they proceeded to open the door. It only took one step forward into their home before they could see that I was not in fact James, and they quickly realized that I was actually here to kill them. This was when their face, frozen in fear, presented itself on screen. It was the most normal face I had seen so far, with all of its parts matching one another in perfect cohesion. It was nothing like those I had examined before, but I could detect the faint outlines of them, and my experience up until this point begged me to pull them away just as I had done multiple times before. I first picked away at the eyes, then the nose and mouth, but I didn't stop there. I stripped away their skin, then chunks of flesh, peeling off layer by layer what made them identifiable until all that was left was a skull that I tore its jaw away from before the screen finally went black. Moments later, I was given a report to hail the end of the mission, and this is where the original Game Jam entry version ends. But in the expansion of Skinface, there's another area where you're given a new target within a different apartment complex. Its security is much tighter than the last location, however, so it introduces the ability to steal the faces of policemen too in order to sneak past them, which requires having at least 2 of their features on your face. You can even store parts you find on a mannequin to help you build up the mask you need to deceive the target while avoiding raising the suspicion of security, again aiming to gain close proximity to them. And thanks to the ability to steal parts of people's faces to imitate something you're not, you can successfully eliminate your prey. There is also an additional brief closing scene in the Steam version, but I'll leave that for yourselves to experience, and you should definitely wishlist the game if you want to see even more in the future. When I asked about the plans for the possible full game, developer Adam Pype said that,
I think doing maybe 10 or so levels, each in new locations that kind of alludes to what kind of world this is taking place in would be interesting, and allow just enough time to introduce new mechanics and explore them properly. I think we can get pretty weird with it, but the point would definitely be to explore what's possible with this face ripping mechanic. I think that's a fun design space to play around with, and I already got some good ideas. It would also be a good chance to play around more with level design, as I think this stealthy action lends well to interesting geometries and layouts. It would be a short game, perhaps a couple hours, very focused on gameplay.
The premise of the game left me with a few questions, like why were we sent to kill the targets, and why do so in the fashion that we did? It didn't seem as though it was enough to just murder the victim. We had to strip every part of their physical identity away until there was nothing left. They were also the only people in their area with a whole face of their own, whereas the others we stole from looked like they too were trying to mimic the appearance of another. It made me wonder if some kind of creature had started to take over humanity, attempting to take their place by wearing their skin and features. When thinking about the mechanics, my mind drifted to the board game Guess Who, where you pinpoint which character is your opponent's by using a process of elimination based on physical traits. It's kind of like if the aim of Skinface wasn't to copy the visage given to you, but instead figure out what the person in the photo looks like, building a picture of their identity until it's fully complete. There's an undeniable uncanniness to the faces we come across in the game. I mean, they have what's required to be considered a face, but they obviously don't quite look right. And coupled with the purpose of impersonating the appearance of something else, it reminded me a lot about how the growing prevalence of deepfakes and generative AI are likewise a malicious attack on human identity. It's the normalization of using faces that don't belong to you. A few months ago, my mum sent me something she had received from a family member. It was an AI-generated video of my grandfather, who passed away over 20 years ago, which used a real existing photo of him as the prompt. My mum and I found it strange and upsetting seeing her father act out frames that didn't exist. There was something really violating about the unrealness of it all, and even if the weird overly smoothed out textures and movement weren't present, even if it was undetectable from an actual video, there is nothing AI could ever do to make those additional frames real. It cannot improvise its own ad-libs to a memory of a person and have it ever be anything other than fake. It's a vulgar imitation that makes a puppet of not just a human being, but reality itself. Sure, it builds a fairly convincing mask of a face from a photo it was provided, but the performance falls apart the second someone who actually knows them gets a closer look. Speaking of creative indie horror titles, you may already be familiar with World of Horror, which features some pretty disturbing faces of its own. And in partnership with today's sponsor Lost in Cult, they've just launched World of Horror the board game. Lost in Cult are best known for their high-end premium deep dive books on games like Alan Wake, Mouthwashing, and the now shipping Outer Wilds design works, and they're offering a very special deluxe edition for the World of Horror board game too. This is available exclusively during the pre-order campaign, which runs until the 30th of April, and it includes 5 collectible cards, each hand-illustrated by acclaimed artists within the Japanese horror scene, who offer their own interpretations of the eerie creatures in World of Horror. In addition to this, there are other goodies like a self-assembled lighthouse dice tower, sew-on patches, and the Book of Endings, which has 3 exclusive mysteries crafted with the help of acclaimed writers such as the creator of Clock Tower, Hifumi Kono. The board game is available in the extremely limited Guru edition too, which includes hand-signed prints of the artwork. And there are also Neo-80s and Shrouded editions, which feature different color box variants. If you're watching this after the campaign has closed on April 30th, or just want the standard edition for all its incredible content and art, the standard edition will remain available, but you'll have to be quick if you want the deluxe edition. Lost in Cult always produce amazing collector's items for all kinds of video games, so be sure to check them out at www.lostincult.co.uk or the link in the description, and use code EurothugWOH for 10% off the World of Horror the board game collection or anything from their store right now. A big thank you to Lost in Cult for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Funnily enough, there is another recently released game that includes a puzzle with a similar central mechanic to that of Skinface. And I do want to quickly issue a warning for anyone who plans on playing Romeo as a dead man, because I will be discussing the solution for a minor puzzle as well as a general description of Chapter 5's setting. But I'll do so without any context of the overall story to make it as spoiler-free as I can. In Romeo as a Dead Man, one of the levels you're faced with takes place within a creepy asylum haunted by the ghosts of its past, born from the horrific experiments that were frequently enacted upon its unfortunate patients. At one point, you run into a body sitting upright in a chair with their brain exposed, hooked up to the various equipment surrounding them. A Polaroid photo sits upon their lap, and interacting with the figure brings up the portrait labelled Patrick next to the subject's face, requiring you to use the analog sticks to morph its vacant expression into the same smile as the picture. Uncomfortable squelching sounds and the whining of equipment rings through the room as their face contorts, until the perfect stretching of facial muscles finally fall into place. This is something we repeat twice more, but with different people, and despite the fact that the physical face we control is the same each time and doesn't appear to actually be the person in any of the photos, they still act as a vessel for the individual they're imitating the momentary emotions of. And this in turn is able to evoke an apparition of their remnant psyche to materialize. The presentation of these scenes is pretty over the top in the best way, but it does make the horror atmosphere share its space with comedy. It makes me think of the ridiculously exaggerated expressions you'd play around with in Gary's mod, or those videos where animations are amplified by 500%. Completely depending on the context, the malfunctioning surreal movement of a virtual face can quite easily change from nightmarish to humorous. So it's no wonder games like LA Noire end up being very funny at times. It essentially overemphasizes facial indicators for certain emotions, because they need to be obvious enough to provide clues for the player so they can figure out if a character is lying or not. We're not stealing a face per se, but you could say that we're still stealing the information that they involuntarily provide. But what if you were put into the opposite position, manually commanding expressions to navigate social situations and interrogation? Well, that's an experience you can find in Who's Lyla. Described as a reverse detective adventure game, Who's Lyla has you controlling the face and actions of a character named William. In order to change expressions, you have to click and drag different parts of his face to, for example, turn that frown upside down by pulling on the corners of his mouth. The game will analyze the specific face you're making and use that emotion as a response to whatever dialogue you're faced with. More often than not, you also have to quickly mold William's facial muscles into the desired expression before a timer counts down to 0, which results in some very comical rushed faces as you exaggerate parts to ensure it results in the target emotion. However, this becomes more of a challenge because your canvas will often fight back against your movements, contorting in ways you don't expect as you scramble to move things into their intended place. It's impossible to feel as though his face fully belongs to us. It's simply a vessel for our choices as the player, and yet I couldn't help but feel a slight discomfort when it would retaliate. Again, this messiness brings about some odd looks for William, but also some rather terrifying ones. Managing expressions manually in gameplay felt strangely relatable for me, and I realized that to an extent, it's something that I've done pretty much my entire life. In the past, I've always found that people would misread my emotions when I didn't put conscious effort into animating myself physically and vocally, probably in part because I can sound quite monotone naturally. I slowly learned that in order to get my actual emotional response across, I had to exaggerate my facial expressions and ensure I was physically reacting correctly according to how I was feeling, leaving as little room for misunderstanding as possible. During conversation, I think about stuff like if my brows are furrowed enough to show concern, but not too much so I don't look angry. I have to consciously change my facial expression in minute ways or nod my head when someone's talking to me, because when I don't, people assume I'm not listening. In some ways, it was as though my own face was betraying me if I didn't manually control it, otherwise it would tell people things I did not mean at all. It is genuinely exhausting, but to a certain degree I've had so much practice that I don't need to exert as much energy managing a conversation anymore. So when it came to moving parts of William's face, I already knew the precise placements of every feature to get my intended emotion across, because it's something I had many years of experience with myself. I just think it's so cool when faces are implemented as a core part of gameplay, and how it can discuss topics ranging from identity to the intricacies of social interactions. Sometimes they can be a vehicle for humor, and other times they can be incredibly frightening depending on the context of its uncanniness. In the current day, our faces can be stolen and used against us in so many ways, and it should make us question when a face truly belongs to us. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll have links for the main games I discussed in the description, so feel free to have a look and try them out for yourselves. If you want to make sure you don't miss my future work, be sure to turn on notifications for my channel, or alternatively join my Discord server so you know when I upload. I also stream over on Twitch on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 PM UK time, and I have a VOD channel here on YouTube called EuroVOD 4000, which you can catch up on too. Finally, a huge thank you to my patrons who make all of this possible, and I'll see you soon in the next video.